I did want to begin this morning by acknowledging that we are on the homelands of the Stachys people. Raise your hands, curious, how many of you have seen an orca in the wild? How many? Oh my gosh, is that the most magical thing or what? It takes your breath away. So now, can we imagine a time later on where no one raises their hands? When somebody in the future asks this question and literally no one raises their hands. That is what we're facing right now with the Southern residents. So today we wanted to talk first about what the endangered orcas need, but we want to talk about hope, and we want to talk about people as well. You know the statistics, 74 endangered orcas remain. Some of you can name them as individual beings. Many of you consider them your family members as well. So I don't have to tell you all, they're starving, Chinook salmon runs have crashed, noise and disturbance from vessels interferes with communications, toxics impairs their survival and the survival of their prey. But today, what I wanted to talk about is what are we going to do about it? We, meaning you all, me, what are all of us going to do about it? That, frankly, is why I am hopeful. So, and I'm fired up. I've got to say, coming out of that press conference, that's great news. I'm really glad to hear all of that. But I am fired up because we do have solutions for Southern resident orcas. Yes, first and foremost. Woo! I am fired up because never before that I've been aware of have we had so many people so deeply engaged in issues that literally have dogged us for decades. And I am fired up because the public is demanding action right now. This year I have the privilege of serving on Governor Inslee's Orca Recovery Task Force as well as the Contaminants Work Group. A number of you were involved in that effort as well. And I have to say, I'm so proud of the task force recommendations, I really am. And that list is very long. I will not apologize for the list. The list is long because the need is great. And Governor Inslee, we did not make your job easy for you, but we spoke to what the orcas need. And I'm so grateful for what you just talked about, and I'm glad to have it shared with the folks here as well. Thank you. It is also my pleasure to introduce you to Orca Recovery Task Force Co-Chair Stephanie Solien. And I wanted to share, almost a year ago to the day, Stephanie and I and a few other people had a conversation about how do we galvanize action for Southern resident orca recovery. We, again you all, me, we together, we cannot fail these whales. How do we do this? How do we lean in as a state? So I'm so glad to say 1 year later, here we are. We have people like Stephanie who have dedicated, literally volunteered countless hours drawn from her deep, deep passion for Puget Sound and Salish Sea recovery. And I have to say we're so grateful for you as well as your equally talented co-chair Les Purse, who is not here today. We're so glad you accepted Governor Inslee's invitation to co-chair the task force. Stephanie.
Well, welcome and thank you very much. Because the governor has a very tight schedule, I'm going to bring him up to the podium immediately. But first, Governor, I want to say on behalf of Les Purse, my co-chair, and myself, the task force, the working group, and the 18,000 members of the public who sent you the recommendations, thank you for what you're going to announce today. We're very grateful and impressed with the bold and unprecedented actions and funding that you're bringing to bear to recover our beloved orcas. So with that, I want to introduce Governor Jay Inslee.
Thank you. There's one thing I know about the state of Washington. We value our orcas, we treasure our orcas, we love our orcas, and we are going to save our orcas in the state of Washington. We're committed to this principle. There are many reasons for saying that, but one of this is we recognize this. When we save orcas from toxic chemicals, when we save them from pollution, when we save them from climate change, we save ourselves. We are inextricably. As the orcas go, so go we. Our fates are intertwined. And we know that when we work for the orcas, we work for our children, for their health and for their futures of recognizing what orcas means in their lives. Now, I just want to share just maybe one or two stories about orca. One, I was up at Limekiln State Park, the only whale watching park in the world today, I believe. And I was up there with my kids, and we were watching the orcas, and they were somewhere off the beach feeding, and they kind of disappeared for a minute. And there was about 100 people standing on the park just kind of watching to see when they were going to surface. And all of a sudden, there were like 5 or 6 orca who came up in unison, in a line, like an organized parade, and surfaced about 40 yards in front of Limekiln Park. Now, when that happened, those 100 people went nuts. You thought they just won the lottery. It was the same voices I heard as when the Seahawks beat the Green Bay Packers a few years ago. People were joyous. There was something uplifting about this creature. There's something ennobling about this creature. There's something inspiring about this creature. And people feel it very deeply. And preserving those moments is something for us, not just the orcas. Now, we are connected to them, separated by evolution, but joined by a moment in time. We basically have about the same body temperature as they do. We have about the same heart rate, we have the same familial connections, and we have the same threat that is threatening our children as well as Tahlequah's calf. And we should be bound and determined to do what we can to keep our children and the children of the Southern Resident Orca a chance to survive. And our package is going to do that. I've just announced a budget that's going to put our money where our hearts are. We have a budget to save the orcas in the state of Washington. And I'm excited about that. So I just want to thank you for your voices and your advocacy. Maya, particularly, I want to tell you how much I appreciate your leadership, and Stephanie and Les and Senator Ranker, who's going to do a great job leading this effort in the legislature. And I want to thank you for all the work you're going to do. I think this should be the rule for the next several months. For every hour you get to do orca watching, you got to do 50 hours of legislative watching, okay? If you do that, we're going to do good things. Good luck to us. Happy holidays. Thanks, Stephanie.
Well, I would like to, again, welcome all of you and thank Governor Inslee for the press conference he just held. I just attended the governor's press conference, and he is serious about recovering the orca and has embraced the task force recommendations wholeheartedly. The majority of our recommendations to protect the southern resident killer whale and to recover them are in his budget proposal. He has proposed a $1.1 billion investment in packages, and that's significant. He has embraced the recommendations on vessels and on finding more salmon for the orca and also on contaminants. I want to make sure that we're going to be able to get handouts for folks because I don't have all the recommendations right in front of me. But on salmon, he's definitely making increased investments in spill over the Snake River Dam, in hatchery production, along with habitat recovery and protection. And he's also making investments in enforcement, both of our shorelines as well as protecting the orcas that are out on the water. He has put a temporary 3-year suspension on whale viewing for all boats of the Southern Resident Orca, and he has drawn a very large 400-yard circle around individual whales to protect them from vessels. We know that's going to be very important to quiet the water and the disturbances around the orca so they can find the few fish that are there. on contaminants. He's making investments in infrastructure for stormwater, as well as the sewage and wastewater treatment. So the announcement was just this morning. There's a lot to still learn and comprehend, but based on what I've been briefed on last night, it is a package we can all be proud of. I want to share, before I introduce Senator Ranker, a letter. One of our task force members, Donna Sandstrom, and I were invited to speak to a class of 2nd and 3rd graders at Lafayette Elementary School in West Seattle last week. And it was so heartening to see these young people who care so much about the orca. Their teacher, Carolyn Whipple, has been teaching the students about orca recovery and the work of the Orca Task Force. They knew exactly what the task force had been up to. They knew all about the threats that face these orca, that they need more salmon, they need clean and less polluted waters, and they needed less noise from ships and vessels. So we got a number of letters that they wrote to the task force, which I intend to share and also post on our public comment. But I wanted to read one letter from a little girl in the classroom that's just an example of how much they care and really how proud I am of the work that we've done, but yet we still need to do. So the letter is, Dear Task Force, orcas are getting endangered. We need orcas because they are good for the environment. Orcas need more food, salmon that they eat. We need to stop pollution. They should be allowed to swim in the sea without anything hurting them, which is true, Poppy. And she says, thank you for listening, bye, Poppy. So orcas should be allowed to swim in the sea without anything hurting them, and that's the job we have as we now take the governor's recommendations forward. It's the job that our great leaders in the legislature will have, and we look forward to working with them. And I want to introduce Senator Kevin Ranker, also a task force member, a neighbor on Orcas Island, and someone who has just been a stalwart leader. He knows his issues. He loves this place we call home and the Sailor Sea. And we're really excited that you're going to be chairing a committee that will work with us on so many of these important issues, Senator. Thank you for being here.
I want to start by thanking Governor Inslee for having the vision to stand up this very important task force, and also having the vision to stand us up for 2 years. We accomplished an incredible amount of work in this first year, but we have a great more to do. And so I look forward to working with our task force members to continue this effort. I also have to thank Stephanie and Les, our 2 co-chairs, for guiding us through this, and Maya and all of our state agencies, frankly, Fish and Wildlife, Puget Sound Partnership, for coming together. This really brought together, this task force, a number of people who came into the room with very divergent views and left the room, for the most part, on the exact same page, which is recognizing that extinction is not an option. Dr. Joe Gatos with the CDOC Society said to me some time back that we are at or below carrying capacity with this population, which means we are at or below the point where there are enough reproductive males and females in the population to sustain the population. And that's when extinction happens, and that is not an option. And so what we have before us today is a list of recommendations that have gone to the governor and now will come to the legislature that we must act upon. And this full list goes across the board. It says, yes, we will increase flow over the dams. It says, yes, we will start dealing with toxins in not just a proactive way, but a very deliberate, very strategic, and aggressive way to make sure we get those toxins out of our nearshore marine environment. And it says that our orca starving is not an option, so we must increase the food supply for salmon, which is our forage fish, but also increase salmon habitat and hatchery production, making sure that there are more fish out there for them to eat. And then I have to thank the whale watching industry for stepping up in the way they have, because the last recommendation deals with vessel traffic. And the whale watch operators are some of the only ones out of all these recommendations who are personally being impacted, financially being impacted, and they are stepping up and recognizing that maybe it's time to take a little bit of a break on the whale watching of just these southern residents, because what we know is there are incredible transient whales and humpback whales and all of these other whales and other marine mammals and wonderful things to see on the sea. And so what we see is we take a break for a few years, give them a little space, give the endangered orca whales a little space, but recognizing that whale watching as an industry, I have to tell you, my first experience seeing an orca whale was on the bow of a vessel out of Friday Harbor. My little girl's first experience was on the stern of a vessel out of Friday Harbor. That sense of awe you get when you first see a whale in the wild, that touches you forever. And that is what builds lifetime conservationists. That is what empowers and inspires each of us to do everything in our power to save these whales. And a lot of that comes from being on a vessel watching those whales. So while we're going to take a break for a limited time to give the endangered whales a break, we will still continue to educate and empower our citizens to love and deeply care for all of these species. And in recovering these whales, we recover the Salish Sea. And as the governor said, as the orca goes, so we go. So let's get together on this. Let's work as hard as we can to make sure that these recommendations don't just sit on a shelf, but they become policy. They get passed through both the House and the Senate, and they go back to the governor's desk to be signed into law. And I look forward to celebrating that day with so many of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ranker, and that's why I'm fired up. I am fired up because I live in Tacoma, and over the last couple weeks, I can't tell you how many people are flocking to the waterfront as the Southern residents are in town. In November, the conservation districts hosted Orca Recovery Day. This is what gives me hope. We are figuring out a path forward on this. And I did want to share two stories. I was at a wedding this summer, and I overheard the people at the table behind me talk about the mother orca and her dead calf and how it was impacting them personally. And I think that story really gripped all of us, and it got so many people's attention. What you may not realize, some other friends of mine had the fortunate time to go to the Galapagos Islands in Ecuador in August. And when they came back, they shared a story that one of the passengers on that vessel, without any connection to the Puget Sound region, that passenger was in tears talking about Tahlequah and her calf, half a world away. So it's a good reminder that today the world is watching our next move, and what we, again, in the collective sense, what we do will influence the fate of the Southern Resident Orcas. And I gotta tell you, I say we pull hard. Now is the time to do it. There will never be a better time to do it. And frankly, recovering Southern Orcas is, Southern Resident Orcas, it's a clear priority for the state. It's more than a symbol, it's an indicator of the health of not just Puget Sound, but all of our connected waters. And frankly, it will be a test of our ability to work together toward shared solutions. So Stephanie mentioned some of the elements that were in Governor Inslee's proposals. I'm seeing that there are substantive actions that address all three threats. That's absolutely terrific. I'm seeing actions that will involve rural communities. They will involve urban communities across the state of Washington as well. And as you heard, we have short-term actions, including giving the orcas more space. It's just the right thing to do right now, as well as doubling down on our long-term commitment to habitat and pollution recovery. And I should say too, we all recognize a lot of these actions, while they may be in the name of orcas, they will also make us a more resilient state in the face of climate change. So WEC is part of the Environmental Priorities Coalition. We selected Orca Emergency Response as one of our 4 priorities for the 2019 legislative session, and we'll be working hard. We'll be working hard on habitat protections, on reducing noise and disturbance, and preventing and reducing toxics as well. Together with our partner organizations, we're looking forward to working with a growing list of legislators, including new legislators who this summer, as they were campaigning in their districts, they were hearing that orcas matter to their districts as well. So that gives me hope. And I did want to come back to, let's not forget that today is about people, and I think it's very important, we in the Orca Task Force and the larger community, we need to acknowledge this renewed focus on orca recovery has highlighted the unmet needs for statewide salmon recovery. We have not recovered salmon. It's also important to remember that there are people who depend on salmon, and those people are ailing. That includes tribal nations, it includes fishers across the state of Washington who no longer have access to abundant salmon, and that absolutely has to change. So I mentioned today is about people. That's who's going to change course. That's what we are faced with today, and I wanted to end with one reminder. We have succeeded in the past. For example, in 1972, WEC and a number of environmental groups testified at a legislative hearing with the game department at the time against capturing orcas from Puget Sound. And that was 1972. The very last orcas were caught in Puget Sound right out here in Bud Inlet in 1976. That's 4 years. It took 4 years to do that. We do not have that time. We need to double down now. And when we look in the early 1970s, yes, our federal and our state leaders, they did the right thing, and they were under tremendous pressure from the interests who were benefiting at that point, orca capture. So this is a lesson for me because today I would argue that that stop capturing orcas is so darn obvious, and yet at the time, it was perceived as very difficult to do politically. So that's a lesson for us because in 2019, we will be at hearings again, and we will not be alone. Our partners, allies, supporters, we will all be there to push for what's needed on behalf of the Southern residents. So today, in conclusion, we took a really important step forward. Yes, it's a long journey. We have more steps to go. But again, I remind us all that if we fail these whales now, that's on us. There will never be a better time to do it. We double down now. I wanted to say thank you for each of you for your own individual commitments to Southern Resident Orcas. And frankly, working with folks like you, this is what gives me hope. So let's do this. Thank you.